Story is in a strange place when it comes to certain modern space games. As a concept, there's a strong argument that it isn't even needed in some cases. For example, in an open world sandbox built-in space game, do you even need any story? Sure, there's some necessary context, such as you play as a robot, or you are lost among trillions of planets. But having a story isn't very important to the fundamentals. On the other hand, there's games like Mass Effect, full-on RPGs where story is the primary focus. By and large, people play those games purely for the purpose of experiencing that story. And then there's a different type of space game altogether. The type that drops you into the game world as Joe Average, with the sole objective to make your way through that world and live within it. Games then like Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen, and possibly No Man's Sky 2. How the idea of stories serves these types of games can very quickly get more than a little murky. For the most part, these games are set in large-scaled worlds, and they have a body of lore that serves as a backdrop for that world. But how much does that lore determine your actions within those games? So how much story affects your position within a game might depend on how much attention you as a player actually pay to all of that. By and large, a player can completely ignore the story and lore within Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen and No Man's Sky, for example, and not really be too much worse off for it. So the question I sometimes wonder about then is whether this actually matters. The answer to that is pretty simple. It depends on what is meant by the word story. Clearly, Elite Dangerous doesn't need a campaign. As a player, you are not, nor should you be, playing Commander Shepard, the lone hero that saves the entire Milky Way from the Thargoids on board his trusty Anaconda. However, there's also another way of looking at the idea of story. Story can also be told through the world itself, or to put it another way, a living, breathing world conveys its own story. For example, some of the best RPGs are not only known for their story, but also for the way their game world feels so alive. I'm sure that as soon as I said that, some examples came into your mind. Whether that's a living Wild West, a vibrant active city, or a breathing wasteland. As a games player, I've spent hundreds of hours lost in those vast living worlds. To me, a living world is perhaps one of the most important stories of all. The feeling that the activities within that world take place with or without me. That the world has a breathing cycle to it. That it changes with day and night or day to day. Personally, I feel any open world online game that doesn't have this very important quality very quickly becomes sterile. And now if I had to cite an example of a game world that made a very poor job of this, it would be the launch version of Fallout 76. A key aspect of Fallout titles is the fact they feel alive. Regardless of how quirky they may be, the NPCs and their stories add a lot of life to the Fallout games. Fallout 76 releasing without that made the world feel lifeless and static. Bethesda eventually changed this, and now Fallout 76 is actually a pretty decent title. A living world then makes an immense difference to a game. So how do the current big space games stack up when it comes to this vital part of gaming? Star Citizen. Yes, I know how people feel about this title, but Star Citizen is arguably a good example here, because it does the best job of conveying the illusion of a breathing game world. Let me explain. One part of conveying a living, breathing game world is detail. What would GTA or Red Dead Redemption be without detail? This is one thing that CIG have pushed for from the very early days, an unparalleled level of detail within an open world space game. By and large, it succeeds extremely well with this. Each city and starport within the game is immediately recognizable by its style and architecture. The level of detail at every location is extremely impressive. Due to all this detail then, Star Citizen very quickly, at surface level at least, gives the impression of a living, breathing world. A world that has its very own story. But take a deeper look and you soon realize that, for now at least, the detail is only skin deep. Without active NPC life, without events that affect the world on a local and regional level, Star Citizen remains, for the moment, a static world, albeit one with a lot of detail. So, what about Elite Dangerous? Well, Elite is a massive game world with 400 billion star system. Many tens of thousands of those are populated with bases, space stations, planetary ports and settlements. You can fly around these and even walk within them. Scale, of course, is a vital part of a living, breathing game world. Skyrim feels alive, in part, due to the sense of scale it conveys. However, the sense of scale in Elite is actually so large that it becomes self-defeating. It lacks that all-important component of detail. Most places look similar and soon even feel a variation on the same. Yet, Frontier have overlaid this game world with an important layer called the background simulation. This brings regular change to the game world on a local and regional level, and for those who pay attention to the BGS, it adds a level of life to the game. But for everyone else, the effects of the BGS aren't especially visible. The reason for this is the lack of detail. When one set of generic features swaps out for another set of generic features, what you're left with is a game world that doesn't really feel alive. Frontier do counter this somewhat though, with a Dungeon Master attitude of injecting events into the game world. Whether that's community goals or Thargoid-centric events, or even something else entirely, such as a multi-part story arc told in text form via a web-based news service. Star Citizen is also the same, with CIG putting the occasional events in there, although to be fair, not quite to the regularity and scale that Frontier do it. However, there's one more very vital additional component here, and without that, the effect of these events is somewhat limited. More on that mysterious additional component in just a moment. No Man's Sky is in a different condition altogether perhaps to the other two. In some ways, out of all three titles, No Man's Sky perhaps feels the most alive, and that is in large part due to the literal abundance of life everywhere. However, it does suffer from the same problem as Elite. It quickly becomes generic. Now, it may sound to you like I'm beating up on these games, but I'm somehow demeaning them. Yet, I'm really not. And why is that? Well, because despite their flaws, all three game worlds work extremely well, and that's because of the one mysterious vital component that I haven't mentioned yet: the players. Ultimately, all three titles have enough moving pieces, enough detail, enough believability, that when players set about on their activities, they can very quickly bring these worlds to life. It's the reason that another of the big space games that I haven't mentioned works so well, EVE Online, a game driven by its community. Player activity, player-run events, player communities, these are the lifeblood that runs through the bodies of these immense game worlds, and this in turn creates its very own form of story. In the end then, how important is story to online open-world space games? Well, that really depends on how you look at it and how you play. Personally, I still think that as a genre, open-world online space games are still in their infancy in terms of creating a real, living, believable world. There's a long way to go to bring Elite or Star Citizen to the level of something like Red Dead Redemption. Is it something that's even possible? Is it something that should even be attempted? Well, yes, to both of those, I really do believe that eventually it will be possible, and eventually it should be done. Is a fully breathed-in world something that even is needed in a space game? Again, yes, I really do think it is needed. And sure, eventually I do feel the technology will be there, but whether or not someone picks up the gauntlet, then the challenge of all this remains to be seen. But I really do hope that one day it all arrives. In the meantime though, developers are here providing the tools to allow players to create their own stories. The question then is whether that's enough. Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to see your feelings on this. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.